So let's start straight out with the term Mirch Masala, right? My first memory of that was essentially watching Smita Patil throw chili powder in Nazaruddin Shah's eyes, right? And much later, also reading lots of very fancy humanities analysis of how it is interesting that chili is actually being a foreign colonial introduction being used by someone to actually sort of get over somebody who was in a position of power, and sort of very interesting analysis. But it sort of brings me to my first conversation that I want all of you to weigh in. This notion of authenticity in cuisine. All of you are people who have written about food, cooked food, wide range of experiences. What is authentic food? Does it exist? Are there cases where it makes sense? And what do you think of authenticity in food? So, Sadaf, yes.
I will give a perspective of both chef and writer. My introduction to Mirch Masala was also the movie, and also the time when my mother, for no reason, thought, let's burn some chilies, because nazar utarni thi, khud ki, hamari nahi. She wanted to do it for herself. So yeah, and then we were sneezing for at least half an hour. It felt like, and I have never felt it, but I've only heard, it felt as if like a pepper spray. So again, nobody luckily has ever sprayed on my face.
It's a fun fact. Pepper sprays are actually made from chilies only. So capsaicin
chili pepper.
Yes.
So as a chef, as a cook, I don't like the word authenticity. Only reason because I don't think it exists ever in the world. Why? Because the food that I cook, or the food my mother, father, whoever has cooked, or yours have cooked, or even for that matter, the food that you cooked today and the food that you will cook tomorrow in Delhi will not be authentic. Why? Because your fire will change, your environment will change, the ingredient will change, your mood will change as well, hopefully, or will stay same, I don't know. And hence the entire thing of authenticity. So you would always see a chola bhatura, which would cost 500 rupees, just because I have called it authentic, right? Authentic Punjab food, or authentic Delhi or Lahori.
You can also charge 500 if you call it organic also.
Or organic. Yes. No, then 700. Then 700. 699.
It's a number of, it's organic, artisanal,
handpicked,
right? And sustainable, fair price.
Fair price, less fried.
More adjectives, more price. Yes.
So that's the only time when authentic really matters, because you want to get more money. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. From the past to the present, there's always this butter chicken, authentic butter chicken. Even the butter chicken has 10,000 recipes within Delhi itself, within Punjab. If you call the whole region as the butter chicken region, then all of them will have a different kinds of butter chicken. Same goes with dosa or sambar, 10,000 recipes. So for me, as a chef and as a writer as well, I don't think authenticity exists.
What do you think? Do you think authenticity exists in some context, or
First, I must say I am the Mirch in this conversation and dressed up like a Lal Mirch, which I want. So the interesting part of authenticity is that people have this idea that, okay, this is authentic Kashmiri Rogan Josh, which we write about. As a food historian, I agree that authenticity doesn't exist. It's a very fraught term, and which we are really wary of as food historians, because recipes have a way of traveling through borders, through timelines. So there is the Indo-Persian cuisine, which came to India, was cooked in the Mughal kitchens, and then it became something else, traveled to Rampur, where I belong, and then the Rampuris said, we want our own. By the way, it also went to Awadh, and then everyone came to Rampur after 1857, since we were with the British, and so we survived, and so the cuisine really developed. So I do not think that authenticity is something that you can talk about with any authority. Cuisines have a way of amalgamating, of carrying on through times. And so when I did my research, the other part of the question was about spices. So when I did my research on these Persian, not really authentic cookbooks, but let's say the recipes that were there in the 19th century, I was translating them. I realized that initially, as historians, we know that lal mirchi did not really exist. It came with the Portuguese. So all the recipes were being flavored by kali mirch, black pepper. And so the mirch that came in was for the common people because it was so easily available.
Yeah.
And Kali Mirch was for the ashraf, the elite people. And so it got into cuisine much later. And we all the time, we can't cook things without lal mirch, and we want that red sheen on our shorwas and kormas, but it didn't exist. Maybe the colors of the cuisine also were absolutely different. And look
Yeah.
at Persian cuisine. We have the pulao, we have the biryani. The biryani is particularly a Mughal, take on the original pulao. Even pulao is being, fought over by different nationalities that this is original. And look at the Iranian cuisine, which actually inspired a lot of Mughal cuisines. And, we totally changed it. We put a lot of mirch masala into it. Look at the rizala, which was a Bengali dish.
Yes.
Which was cooked by the razil. Razil means a humble or a mean person or a low caste person. And now suddenly, and Rizala, in Rizala, people were using green chilies because the poor people, that was available to them.
Yes.
And pepper wasn't. So then it just came to the Nawab from Awadh at Mitya Burj, and he said, okay, let me make it amazing. And let me just make it for the royal table. And he also introduced potatoes into the pulao. So, recipes just change and transform over time.
Yeah. So it's on a lighter note, a while back I saw an advertisement in Chennai from this very old place that introduced pizzas a little bit before even the big chains like Pizza Hut and Domino's came in. And they advertised authentic paneer tikka pizza because they introduced it before Pizza Hut did, right? And so they were like, we were the original paneer tikka pizza people, so you must eat. So
even in Bangalore, actually, when the first pizza places came, there was this chain called US Pizza, which was like they had outlets in Church Street and everywhere.
Yeah.
And their advertisement was authentic Swedish pizza ovens. How far can it get from like the Italian original? Anyway, it was very well put, what you just said, and it made me think of how like so many of the ingredients we have in Indian food and we take for granted are like are coming from the colonial, what you call basically the Columbian exchange when food from the Americas first entered Europe and then India. So like potato, for example. There's so many dishes in India that you can't imagine without potato. Like the Bengalis put potato in their biryanis. Biharis and UP walas, basically the diet is like potato and bread. And here in the south, it's like masala dosa. How can you have masala dosa without potato filling?
Yes.
And that goes for so many different vegetables that actually originate, apart from the chilies. There's a lot of things that go into Indian food that like, if you go 500-600 years back, it would not have been on the menus or in their recipes because they did not exist here. And potato, for example, it's around 130, 140 years ago that it became like accepted as an Indian vegetable. Even before that, it was actually very rare with potato in Indian food. So in my new book also, I've been researching things like, I was looking into the history of chicken, for example. Like you mentioned butter chicken, authentic butter chicken. So chicken is an original Indian vegetable. It grew first in the jungles of Bengal.
Yes.
And then it somehow went to Punjab, where it's like the national bird today.
Yes.
Already in Harappan times, like in Indus Valley civilization, had chickens.
Yes.
And they had a kind of tandoor oven type of thing. So technically, we don't know if they had tandoori chicken, but once you have a chicken in your one hand and a tandoor in your other hand, it's just about combining it correctly, and you might have tandoori chicken. So you might say that tandoori chicken could be like a very authentic Punjabi dish. But then the thing about chicken is also that, from Harappan times, it took a couple of thousand years before it reached Europe. So the Greeks and Romans, you can see, like on Greek vases, you can see paintings of chicken that date to 700 BC. And then we know that like in the UK, the first chickens were eaten around the year 0. But I mean, that's not the reason why Europeans started counting time from the year 0. There was another reason. But chicken reached there at about that time. And then it was through the Columbian exchange. In fact, Columbus himself brought the first chicken to America. And before that, Americans did not have chicken. And I've read somewhere that 1 in 3 chickens in the world is a Kentucky Fried Chicken.
Yes.
And so you imagine, like, without the Indian input, you would not have KFC.
Yeah.
But when we come to butter chicken, which is like, I would peg it at around 1950s as an original creation date. Before that, it would not have been possible to make butter chicken because you need broiler chicken. And that was like what the Americans did to the Indian jungle fowl.
Yes.
The
country chicken. Yes.
The jungli murg in America, it was refined into broiler chicken so that it would be easier to put in the Kentucky Fried
It's simple.
Chicken.
You just prevent it from walking.
Exactly.
That way it becomes,
And so in the end, what we have is that like chickens, if you read travelogues from around 100 years ago, like Somerset Maugham or somebody who traveled in India, they would always complain that the chickens are very scrawny and,
lean meat, yes.
Like a very healthy meat, and they wanted to have more unhealthy meat, I guess.
Yes.
So then in one of the first 5-year plans after Indian independence, the government decided that we need to introduce broiler chicken.
Yes.
And this was what made butter chicken possible. Yeah. Now, it's up to the jury here to decide how authentic does that make butter chicken.
Yes. In fact, actually, the funny, you mentioned Columbus, right? One of the funniest stories in general is, and you mentioned the term Mirch and Kali Mirch, right? That word Mirch, pepper, and in South Indian, Dravidian languages, milagu, or, the word for pepper, right? It's a very curious connection between all of them. Because Columbus was sent to find India. Actually, he was sent to find pepper, right? So he reached somewhere, in typical European confidence, he said, this is India, right? I don't care what it is. To the point where we still call them West Indies, right? We call them Red Indians and all of that, right? He declared it India. Okay. Then he said, where is pepper? I didn't find any pepper, right? Then one of the locals bought him one of those habanero and those chilies that actually grow there, which is native to Mexico and the Caribbean, right? He looked at it and said, we'll call it pepper. So even today, Americans call chilies pepper, right? That's the only reason, the chili pepper, bell pepper and all of that. And then when it came to India, Indians were not used to pepper either, right? And then, so in South India, they didn't know what it was. So they used the term for black pepper, which is what they were used to, milagu. So milagai became green chili and these things. And in the north, so Kali Mirch and then your, Lal Mirch sort of became that, right? So that's and the other funny thing is that the most common use Kali Mirch is Kashmiri Lal Mirch, right? None of it is actually from Kashmir. All the lal mirch we use in our kitchen is grown in Karnataka. It is Byadagi chilies which are sold as Kashmiri lal mirch. And by the way, most of that lal mirch is not even used in food. It's used for making lipsticks.
It's either the Byadagi or something called fafla. So it's either you would put fafla as Kashmiri or you would put, or in fact, in the restaurants you'd also use the fafla to make chili flakes. So that's also grown in Karnataka or Rajasthan. You will not find Kashmir chili.
Oh yeah, indeed. So I wanted to which brings us to the second larger theme about when people say Indian food. Even here in the first discussion, we spoke about rasala, we spoke about butter chicken, tandoori chicken. These are what I would call restaurant dishes, right? They're not, very rarely do people make butter chicken at home. It's essentially, it's basically leftover tandoori chicken dunked into a makhani gravy, right? That's really what it is, right? And a dal makhani, for instance, if you want to make from scratch, it's a 9-hour process. In a restaurant, you get it in like 10 minutes. Because the dal is cooked, the gravy is cooked. Combine both, add the one ingredient that makes any bad dish good, which is butter. and then you get dal makhani. So I want to talk about lesser known cuisines, regional cuisines that often don't get representation because it's not easy to go to a restaurant and find them.
Start taking the cues from the Kali Mirch itself. In Bihar, the Kali Mirch is called, wild guess? Any wild guess what is Bihar mein Kali Mirch is called, or the black pepper called?
Is it
Yes.
Gol Mirch? Okay, I see. Okay.
It's also in Bengali, yeah. Why? Because it's Gol. So it's Gol Mirch.
So they don't call green chilies Vilayati Mirch?
No, they're green chilies malcha. It's not even mircha, malcha.
Malcha, okay.
Because you will die after eating after this. So it's malcha. And also Bihar defies gravity. So everywhere the chili grows downwards, in Bihar and Bengal it goes upwards. These are relative of bullet chilies. If you haven't had bullet chili, then you should.
Bird's eye. Oh,
The bird's eye, yeah. So it just goes up.
Yes.
When I moved out of Bihar, for me, I was looking at the bushes, like, in Ranchi, where I grew up, there it was going up. What's up?
Yes.
We were going up. But yeah, when it comes to regional cuisine, I think one of the thing which has happened because of the internet world, the other side of the internet world, is that now we know a particular region with their dish, that a dish only, and that a dish becomes the dish, right? So like, for example, if I'll ask you, Lucknow is popular for? So Galavati kebab, somebody said.
Galavati
And
kebab.
end of the story. Nobody knows beyond that what happens. And then if you go to Lucknow, you're like, oh, first thing first, let's go to Chowk or Tunde Kebabi.
Tunde Kebabi, yes.
Right? Nobody knows. Actually, Tunde was the guy's name. So people are like, okay. The same Galavati comes to Delhi and becomes... Anybody from Delhi? No. The same Galavati comes to Delhi and becomes Gulati.
Gulati kebab.
Gulati
Okay.
kebab.
Yes.
Right? Gulati is a human being's being name, not his kebab.
Yeah. Not kebab made from gulati.
Not all from Gulati. Yeah.
Minced Gulati. No,
Nobody did the Gulati there.
Yes.
So Galavat.
Yes.
So that's and that becomes, like, for example, now it's changing, but if in world outside India,
Right.
Indian dish becomes North Indian cuisine. North was very prevalent, like North Indian cuisine, and within North India you'll have like butter chicken is the dish that India is popular for, and that's what happens across, right? Now, if you go to Bihar, Jharkhand, it's end of the story, right? Nobody knows what's beyond that. Also, so that's a sad reality. Often when people are documenting or talking about the food, trying to sort of move past that. And yesterday, in fact, one of my favorite winter breakfast is something called chura matar or chura ghugni. So Bengalis would understand as well what is a chura ghugni, but not with the kala chana, but with the green peas, the green matar. And these are not Banarsi thing as well. If people have gone to Banarsi, it's not Banarsi, it's not a Marathi poha. And when I made that, and I, just like everybody else, put it up on social media. That's what you do. You eat. No, you don't eat. You put up on social media, and then you eat. So I did that as well. And people went like nuts. They're like, oh, what happened? Because then suddenly there's one unanimity that, this is because it does not just bring a factor of nostalgia to people. Somebody from US saying, oh, I miss this thing. And when I go to Bihar, he was from a place in Bihar called Bhagalpur. And Bihar, just like every other state in India, Bihar is also considered as the rice bowl of India. We are rice bowl. So there's something called Katalni's rice, right? And that's really aromatic, similar to what you got like Jeera Kashala. So they were reminiscing on this, and then somebody from Pakistan actually said, oh, we also eat this because we also Biharis. So this matar ghugni is something which I think, and I over-romanticize that, and I think we need to over-romanticize the other things as well.
Ghugni is actually quite delicious.
Yeah.
Yes.
And people asking, is there like a festivity? And I'm like, no, it's seasonal because it's green peas season. And what is a better version, frozen or fresh? That we'll talk in the evening.
Yes.
At 6 with
All right.
us. But right now, let's say the green fresh peas that we get is the season. So I would always say that, no, let's move past litti chokha, butter chicken, dosa sambar, and find these regionalities. Yeah.
So I think, So he mentioned social media, right? And the good thing about social media is that actually people get to discover how to make rare cuisines. You can now find out. You can search for Manipuri cuisine. You can search for Odia cuisine, lesser represented cuisines, and so on. In an equal measure, the other weird thing about social media that I found, there was this interesting study where a bunch of guys actually took hundreds of recipes from social media, from Instagram particularly, and tried cooking them exactly as per the instructions in that video. And 80% of them ended up being undercooked if you make it exactly the same way that it looks like. Because it turns out, when people make stuff for social media, they undercook it so that it looks better on camera. Right? So it causes all of these very weird distortions in how we think about food. But on the wider sense of lesser appreciated regional cuisines, what are your experiences?
Yes, so you see, I grew up with Rampur cuisine, and it was
Rampur, you said. Okay.
Rampur.
Okay.
Yes.
The whiskey.
Yes, the whiskey.
Yes.
The whiskey and the Nawab.
Yes.
And the Rampur Raza Library. People know very little about Rampur.
Is that whiskey authentic to Rampur, or is it?
Yes, it was. The plant was set up by Nawab Raza Ali Khan, and so it's still being produced there. That's an incentive to come over. So, speaking about this whole idea of us being, having a sort of a palate that is conditioned to accept the cuisines that we grew up with. And now on social media or through internet, we come to know about various cuisines. And a lot of them are beyond our imagination. So when we were collecting articles and connecting to the food writers from different regions of Muslim South Asia, we were trying to document some of the lesser known regional cuisines, and the writers were writing about them. For instance, we connected to a writer called Chengiz Khan, who was from Manipur, and this was before Manipur became really political and all that. So he told us about the Pangal community of Muslims in Manipur who have borrowed from the Meitei local community, and they have this irumba, which he sent us pictures and how to make it. It was bharta and fermented fish in it. Similarly, when you go to Leh, it's a Yarkandi pulao, which has different. It is like pulao, but it also has some dry fruits. You have mutta mala. I don't know. It was something that I had never heard of. Mutta mala is
Garland of eggs, literally.
Yes, it is a garland of eggs. Again, the author sent me a lot of pictures, but it is a very tough thing to make, actually. They're like garlands of eggs and very, very difficult to execute. So we don't know a lot of these cuisines, and especially when you talk about North Indians. So North Indians are pretty happy in their little bubble extending from Mughal cuisine and Awadhi cuisine, and they've forgotten Rampur in between, which I'm just trying to remind them of. And then the Bengali cuisine, and there's so much that we don't know about the South. And so when we started researching, it was an eye-opener for us as well, that, so many cuisines exist. And what is the taste of this cuisine? And some of them were very foreign to our palate and you need some time to get used to it. But I would sincerely hope that people start exploring the regional cuisines. Now we have this kind of a culinary travel syndrome, I call it. Thanks to Zomato and thanks to all the restaurants. And so my kids would say, okay, let's order Thai today and Lebanese today, etc. Because these forgotten recipes...
You can even order Thai Lebanese fusion also.
Yes, all sorts of fusions and permutations. But the cuisine of the different areas, the different states of India, which are sometimes very difficult to cook for us, they're not really readily available. At least the awareness of them, the tasting and, kind of helping your palate accept the various states of various tastes of various states, I think that's a very, very important aspect.
So one, to her point about somehow there seem to be some cuisines within India that have wider acceptance. Meaning that you can find idli, dosa, sambar everywhere. You can find naan, right? I mean, in fact, in Chennai, the general joke is that the standard default restaurant template is Chettinad, Tandoori, Punjabi, and Chinese. So this is like a typical, you can set up one kitchen, he'll know this better. I mean, it's very easy to cook all of those. We can very rapidly make them and so on. But when cuisines feature some slightly harder to widely accept, fermented fish, right? Slightly funkier cuisines, and so on. So it kind of also gave me one of the interesting incidents I had was I was trying to make, again, to use that term, authentic allam chutney, which is sort of like a ginger chutney from Andhra Pradesh, and I like that fiery. And so one of my rules of navigating YouTube cooking is to try and find a video spoken in the language of the region that I'm cooking. So that way, it's one way for me to make it in that style. And this was a ginger chutney, and in true Andhra style, there was this much ginger, and about, I think, effectively 1 truckload of chilies came, emptied all the chilies into the vessel effectively, and that's how the thing was made. And then the chef, at the end of making that very fiery chutney, if you find it is not spicy, you can add more chilies. So I'm just wondering whether do you see patterns where there are some things that are likely to be more universally acceptable than other cuisines? Some things like Italian, like Indo-Chinese food, like chettinad and so on.
Well, what you said somehow made me think of like a little while back at a food stall just in the streets here in Bangalore. I had a Maggi noodle paneer dosa, which is like wonderful. It combines like South Indian with Punjabi and Chinese, like this three Indian national cuisines, one can say.
I mean, doing what geopolitics is not able to do, right?
So, anyway, who knows? Geopolitically speaking, that dosa maker may soon land up in jail if these border conflicts continue. But seriously speaking, like in my latest book, which is about like how I travel around, not all of India, but much of India, and eating local food, I found that, and especially like I don't fly in the book. I travel by train or bus or walking or camel or something like that. I found that. And I didn't eat the camel, but I have eaten camel sometimes. But like what I found was that how food changes very subtly as you travel. Like sometimes every 10 kilometers you have a slightly different cuisine, or like similar food but with different twist. Or sometimes after 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers you come to an entirely different regional cuisine. And there are areas in India, of course, like Goa and Pondicherry and these places which are like, where actually many places in India you feel that the cuisine is very fusion. Like even in Kerala, a lot of the influences are from Arabia because of ancient trade with those countries. But on the other hand, like when you travel in the inland or slightly more remote regions, to come to your question, I found that there's quite a lot of food that one could almost label as authentic because the area is so remote. So like, for example, in Tamil Nadu, you have popular cuisine like chettinadu, which is like all over, you can get it almost anywhere in India. Yeah. And it's like a big food export product. You can even get ready-made chettinad food in the supermarket.
Yes.
And but then next to chettinad, there's kongunad, which is much less known.
Yes.
And the food there struck me as somewhat more authentic because I was looking at the old Sangam epics and what ingredients they talk about. And the food that is served there, even in some restaurants, reflects very well exactly the ingredient list from the Sangam epics. So one can get that feeling that maybe this is the authentic food of, and Kongunad is very much like the heartland of Tamil Nadu. For those who haven't been there, it sort of comprises Coimbatore, Karur,
Erode,
Salaman, those areas which are deep inland and not coastal areas. Yeah. Likewise, in places like Rajasthan, I went to a village called Bishangar where I was staying in a nice hotel called Alila. And the chef working in the hotel, I think it was, I was asking him like, okay, what is real Rajasthani food? So he took me to a village woman who cooked from her own garden, whatever she pulled out of the garden, and she did it on like a wood fire, and I had lunch with her and tried that food, which was like and that also felt like really authentic. It felt okay, maybe she put chilies and things in it, but otherwise it felt like, okay, this might be like how this food has been cooked traditionally in villages in Rajasthan,
Right.
Since ages. And they had some very interesting ingredients also in parts of, like in Shekhawati, for example, they had something called a desert bean, where they make a dish called khair sangri. And this is like a thing that grows on trees, and you can pluck it and dry it, and
Right.
and then it'll keep for 10 years in case there's like a famine, like in the old days. It's like almost like a famine food. And now you can get it in some restaurants, and they sort of reconstitute it by soaking it in curd, and curd is also like an ancient Indian invention, I think.
Yeah.
So that also felt authentic. And then, of course, the tribal areas in the Northeast, like you mentioned, dried fermented fish. So they have a lot of, like, if you go to places like Meghalaya, and these areas and try the tribal foods, they have quite a lot of fermented things in the food, which is supposedly really good for your gut health.
Yeah, yeah.
And especially fish, because it's also far away from the ocean.
Right, yeah.
So the fish...
Or freshwater fish as well, yeah.
Well, they dry fish.
Okay, so it's seafish but dried, yes.
They dry it and then they ferment it and do various things. Like they stuff it in hollow bamboo tubes.
Yeah.
And pack it and keep it for I don't know how long. And then they cut open the tube and out comes this sort of kind of slightly smelly fish thing, but which they use as an ingredient.
Yes.
And it's a great way of preserving fish in those kind of areas where you don't have a lot of fishing going on. And plus it's fermented, which is good for your gut health and all. And so in these, the tribal cuisines in the Northeast, in many of them, there's a strong emphasis like on herbs. They cook a lot of things without oil or very small quantity of oil.
Yes.
Often the natural fat from the pork, if it's like a non-veg dish, will do instead of putting a lot of oil.
Yes.
And that also strikes me as quite authentic, and probably this has been cooked. Of course, they've added chilies and to some of the things and all, so that you can't escape in Indian food. But otherwise, you can sort of imagine that this kind of food has been eaten for, centuries, generations.
And without change, yeah.
So
it's almost as if I think there is so urban cuisine in general, by definition, has to be fusion. Because cities are products of trade, of migration, and food changes every 10, 20 years based on what you're able to import, export, wars, conquest. But somewhere in some rural, unchanged part of the country or the part of the world, that food is less likely to have changed, right, over time.
Yeah, and you will still be able to find this kind of food that I've described, which is like much less likely to buy that Maggi noodle paneer dosa maker. It's much less likely to butter chicken for serve that kind of thing.
So in fact, I think the interesting thing you mentioned about animal fat itself, right? So I was watching a YouTube video of this sort of elderly Tamil gentleman in a village. And when he said, he was cooking something, he said, you add ney. Ney in Tamil means, if today, to most people, if you say the word ney, it refers to ghee, right? When that old man said it, he did not refer to ghee. He referred to the skin under the duck or chicken. So ney in Tamil literally only means the skin under, that is what it originally meant. But over time, the dairy-based ghee, because dairy was not a big thing in South and East India, right? So it came much later. So today ghee means, dairy milk wala ghee, but ney originally actually meant the fat under the animal, duck or typically duck or chicken, right, for the most part, right, or tallow of any kind, right. So on that note, since we have 7 minutes, as the organizer told us, we must ask questions at the 7-minute mark. So yes, please, yeah.
Hi, anyone on the panel can answer this. It's sort of a two-part question. So when we talk about authenticity, there's one part where it's the ingredients in a dish, and then it's the dish itself. When we're talking about ingredients, there's this farm-to-table concept and, your microbiome where you well adjust to ingredients that are grown around you. And then there's the dish, when we take an example like chicken tikka masala, which the British claim to have as their national dish, but it's also got its roots set back into like South Asia. So when we talk about authenticity of food, are we looking at the ingredients, or are we looking at the dish as a whole, or are we looking at a cuisine?
Anyone?
Actually, like I said, historically, authenticity is a very fraught subject. Because even if we talk about the ingredients have swept across the country, coming with the conquerors, like we have aloo and mirch and pineapple and tomatoes coming in and changing the cuisine. So I won't say that there were authentic ingredients, unless some, of course, were the native ingredients that were already there, like Kerala had pepper and cardamom and all of that. But as far as dishes are concerned, I mean, like, you have to be really secluded and not a part of the larger story of the meandering of cuisines across regions and borders and historically there. So I would say that I would not agree to anything being purely authentic, though every region has its right to claim that this is our authentic cuisine and this is what we've been eating for a very long time.
And I would like to also add that, like, if you really look for something authentic, you'll have to kind of go out in the jungle and find a wild mutton and club it down and rip off its leg and gnaw on it like a Stone Age person might have done. But the fact is that cuisines, per definition, always keep evolving. So you can have something that is more or less authentic depending on what you say, the ingredients that goes into it and the preparation methods. Some things will be fairly true to their origins, whereas most things change wildly over time and adjust according to exactly what ingredients appear. And you, for example, chicken tikka masala wouldn't be possible without the tomatoes, which are again part of the Colombian exchange. Yeah. So while you had chicken in India 4,000 years ago, you had no tomatoes, so you can't really call it a South Asian dish even.
Yeah. So in that sense, I think, if you even to take a Bangalore example, sambar, right? If it has carrot, which it regularly does, your great-grandfather would probably not be familiar with that. Carrots were called English vegetables, introduced pretty recently, cultivated by the British at scale, right? And likewise, the chili in the sambar powder is also relatively pretty new, right? A sambar or a kodambu or something from 300-400 years ago would not have featured chilies also. So the idea of whether ingredient or the dish itself, the definition has always been changing all the time.